ensure that the session is insightful and engaging. And without further ado, let us hand over the session to Timothy Marbun. Big round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Okay, thank you, Regina. Good afternoon, everyone. We're back. We're actually at the same session, but this is the second part of our session. I hope everyone has enjoyed their lunch. If you haven't had your coffee, I asked, the coffee break is at 3, but I urged them to kind of bring it sooner because we'll probably be gone by 3. So you won't need your coffee anymore here. So do insist your coffee to the waiters, our friend, the waiters here. So once again, welcome back to our second part of this session. And to continue this session, I would like to re-invite our speakers from the first part to join me here on stage. I would like to invite the Director of Communal Land from the Ministry of Agrarian Affairs and Spatial Planning ATR BPN, Bapak Iskandar Shah, back on the stage. Also the Director of Human Rights and Humanitarian Affairs of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Indonesia, Ibu Indah Nuria Safitri. And of course, also the Director of Land Resources Rights from World Resources Institute, Ms. Elisa Scalis. If you may please kindly return with me on stage. Let's give them a round of applause, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back, Ms. Kalis, thank you. Once again, you may please take your seat, Pak Iskandar. You may please take your seat. Also, we're waiting for Ibu Indah, who will be joining us shortly as well. I think you'll take the same seat, I guess, yeah. We've booked a seat for you. So now we have more speakers as promised, and they will be sharing their views and their findings upon our topic. And once again, ladies and gentlemen, as we are going to begin this, the second part, I would just like to remind you and urge you to please take part in the discussion that will happen after all the presentations have been conducted. So if you have any stories or experiences that you would like to share with us here, any best practices that have worked for you that we could learn from, please do not hesitate to raise your hand and also tell your story. If you have questions for the speakers as well, please do not hesitate to raise your hand during the discussion part. So we urge everyone, Bapak Ibu semuanya, kalau memang ada mungkin best practice atau pengalaman baik yang bisa dibagikan bersama kita semua di sini, nanti di sesi diskusi setelah presentasi itu kami mengundang untuk silakan mengangkat tangan dan Anda bisa menyampaikan pengalaman Anda juga yang bisa dibagi bersama kita semua di sesi diskusi. Ataupun Anda memiliki pertanyaan, silakan disampaikan di sesi diskusi. Kalau Anda nanti mungkin mau menyampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia pun itu bisa dilakukan karena we provide translation devices here. We didn't have them at the first session. I apologize for that, but we made sure that during the second session we will have translation devices. So kalau memang mau disampaikan dalam bahasa Indonesia juga tidak apa-apa. Is the light too bright? Is it? Oh, okay, Bu Indah, okay. Bu Indah, if you may please join us here on stage. I was actually at the very beginning, I was going to say, Bu Indah, apparently I still recognize you without your hat. Because she always has her hat on usually, and we usually meet outdoors, either in Pejambon or in an event in Bali, and she always has her hat on. You have to have your hat on in Bali, right? So, but I still recognize you without the hat. No worries, no worries. So we are moving on to our next presentation, and I would like to invite our next speakers on stage. Our next speaker is the Global Lead on Land from the World Bank. Please welcome on stage Dr. Mika Petteri Torhonen. And we do have our next speaker, although we don't have any more chairs here, but it's not because our speaker won't be sitting, but he will be joining us online. So we have one speaker who is joining us virtually. He is the Senior Researcher and Director at Lincoln Institute, Mr. Chi Liu, who's joining us virtually. Good afternoon, Mr. Chi Liu. Can we hear him? Oh, there you go. Sorry, we just had you muted for a second there. Good afternoon, Mr. Chi Liu. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear very clearly.
Okay, thank you very much for joining us today online. We wish to have you here. You might want to go on the tour that we have tomorrow, which will be very memorable, but probably in the next chance. We'd love to have you here in Indonesia. So we will go straight to presentations. Like the first session, we will have about 25 minutes for each speaker for each presentations. And afterwards, after both presentations have been conducted, we will go straight into discussions. I think we would have around 60 minutes for discussions afterwards. Now we'll go straight to the first presentation. Our first 20 minutes goes to Dr. Torhonen. So let's give a round of applause to Dr. Torhonen. Is it on? Boleh dinyalakan mic-nya? Okay.
I think you hear me now. So first, on my behalf, thank you very much for having me here. Thank you, Minister of Agrarian Affairs and Spatial Planning, and Secretary General, Director General, and dear friends and colleagues. It's an absolute pleasure to be here on behalf of the World Bank. I have a short presentation, but a lot of the things that I want to say have been said already. But let's see if I can bring in something new to this. Next slide, please. And here I can see the slides also. So I was asked to talk about indigenous people's rights and their registration in Southeast Asia context. Actually, it's probably more generic than that, but I will bring in few facts from this region to the discussion. Myself, I am the global lead on land at the World Bank. We have a small but very active profession at the World Bank on land and indigenous people's rights, customary tenure, and communal land ownership is a big part of what we try to do globally. Next slide, please. So I go around this kind of events with this slide, basically. And what that slide tells us is that there is an unprecedented demand for land in the world. There is a competition over land in the world, everywhere. Many different things impact that. We are growing in numbers. The population is still growing in many parts of the world. We have become urban. More people now live in cities than outside the cities. And it's a very dynamic change. We have climate change that impacts us in many, many ways. Some areas become less favorable for and less suitable for being or cultivating or other land uses. We are on the move. And then we need a lot of land for activities that we need to do in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change. We are also wealthier than ever before. We live longer. That means that for our wealth, we need more space. We need bigger houses. We need nicer spaces. We live longer. We need that longer. And also because we live longer, we need different kind of services that didn't exist earlier. I think I can perhaps leave it there, but the underlying message here is that so much land is only there in the world, and there are too many takers for all of that. Very popular publication, at least in my circles, maybe didn't make the news as strongly as it should have. 2 years now in a row, Land Cap report have come out and set sort of the volume for land that is needed for climate change. Next slide, please. And actually we have ongoing research on the way which looked at all Asian countries, South Asian and Southeast Asian and Pacific countries, and the climate action plans that government publish. And we found out that one of two, almost half of all these actions have something to do with land. And the previous slide spoke about the land cap report's finding that 1 billion hectares of land is needed for a certain type of climate actions. And that 1 billion hectares is 4 times the size of India. So we're talking about huge lands needed for repurposing and land use change in the context of climate change alone. And that's kind of new on top of the urbanization, on top of the population growth, on top of the suitability questions on land. Next slide, please. So in response, the World Bank's land domain is developing a program called, the short name could be Land for Climate. We are interested in tenure security, which is what we talk about today. So that's both a vulnerability question as well as kind of enabling question. If there's a tenure security, then you can expect responsible use on land, and you can also do and process land use changes so that the current users of land are protected. So tenure security is a key. Women's tenure security is proportionally needs proportionally more attention than that of men. That's another area that we have a particular interest to proceed. But then when we go into implementing land use change, which is often what is needed for the climate change, then we also need to look at access to land question, which means quite often not only those rights in the tenure security, but it also means understanding assets, asset valuation, understanding planning, understanding permitting, licensing, and monitoring of changes, construction, for example. So all that need to work if we are to access land efficiently and process those changes. So we have this program on the making, and I will return to the context of Indonesia in coming slides. Next slide, please. But today we perhaps more here in the forest context, and this is a very big context in the climate change and beyond. These numbers are in our upcoming publication, which when you see the upcoming publication, you know it's the last slide. You can, okay, Mika is going to finish now. In that I think these are popular numbers. So within 1 kilometer of forest, over 3 billion people live, 40% of the planet. Perhaps 500 million people are directly dependent, and perhaps 200 million of those are indigenous peoples groups, people who depend on forest. Not just enjoy or are interested in it, but who depend on forest for survival. Next slide, please. The other way to look at it, these are popular claims or popular, is it information, perhaps the right word? That 1/5 of the global land mass of the world is actually under the use of indigenous peoples. And when I talk about indigenous peoples, I'm quite liberally including customary tenure groups, communal tenure groups, and those who are politically fall under the indigenous peoples term. And very large part, perhaps as much as 35% or more of pristine forests, the natural forests, are still in the hands of indigenous peoples. And as we have already spoken here, the Honourable Minister spoke about the trees being the father, the land being the mother, and the river being the blood. It is not economical question, at least not only. It is a cultural, it's an identity-defining question. And if we do not honor that, if we do not provide the tenure security to that, then the whole identity and livelihood is at risk. So it is a very serious matter. It's not a matter of choice. It is something that we have to get right as a humankind. Next slide, please. In terms of forests, very good is that the discourse in the global scene is changing. So it is now mainstreamed language to say that customary tenure groups, indigenous peoples groups, communal land users are good for the forest cover. So where there are traditional communities in the forests are doing better than in forests where there aren't any. This is now popular. Everybody says that this is the truth. So we need to capitalize that moment. And there are evidence too. It's coming up. So I'm here in the slide listing cases from Benin, Peru, Bolivia, Brazil, Colombia, and here in Indonesia, where measures that have concerned tenure security in the forest areas have resulted into positive impact to the forest area. You know, these things are not so easy to prove, and more research is needed. And it is also notable that tenure security is one part of what is needed, but it's not all of it. So community development support mechanisms are equally important for making a positive impact to indigenous people's rights vis-à-vis forest cover. Next slide, please. So, state forests, state lands, many countries have large part of the territory still classified as state land. And this is, for example, at the World Bank and in terms of our safeguard policies, always a challenge. It's very difficult to demarcate between what does the state legitimately own and whether long-term occupancy, long-term land use is encroachment in state land, or whether that is a historical, perhaps indigenous right that should be entertained. But in this topic also, the tone is totally changing. While I'm old enough that in early years of my career I would have spoken to land administration leaders who would have said that this is state land and nobody has rights to it, therefore these people can be evicted. I don't think that sort of discourse is possible anymore. The political price of such an approach would be too high. We have turned the page. We are now open to considering solutions for that. But it remains as a challenge, and I will come to that also in the context of Indonesia in a little bit. But if we look at the numbers of Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Laos, People's Republic, and Philippines seem to have very high territorial area coverage with state lands. Next slide, please. These numbers I can't verify, but they are a result of our best attempt to find the best available information. It would seem to suggest that in East Asia Pacific, there are over 250 million indigenous peoples. That would make the region definitely the biggest in this regard. And when it has such a clear connection also to the forest, it is critical that in this region in particular, we make a good use of this historical momentum when the world is in favor of improving the tenure security for indigenous peoples living in forests. Next slide, please. The legal recognition, you can, once our publication very soon comes out, you can read about it more, but it looks like that there's lots of progress in enabling legislation that it is possible now by law to register communal, indigenous, customary land rights to land registry. And in those countries where that's not possible here, which is Laos and Myanmar, it is possible to entertain land use rights through different forest management schemes. In most countries, both of these approaches are possible. Next slide, please. That historical pledge that I'm talking about, or the historical change in recognizing that communal land rights are good for forest cover, that culminated in 2021 in Glasgow Climate Summit, where 141 countries joined a declaration which includes recognition of indigenous people's rights. So as a land specialist, as a land administration specialist and a land surveyor, I would automatically think then that there are large-scale land activities going on, that there are registration of these types of rights, there are land use right certification programs going on, or that there is a lot of social forestry type of forest management programs. But it hasn't necessarily happened that way. What I'm particularly calling for is investments of scale, because we want countries to finish the work, not only start or pilot or gather in workshops. We want programs that improve the tenure security of all indigenous peoples groups and all customary tenure holders who want to pursue communal land rights. So in that regard, the world is just currently in the declaration stage. The programs are not matching the volume of need, and we need to work on together to create bigger programs. And that's why it's particularly happy to be here in Indonesia, where the government is now stepping forward and creating this particular program to register Ulayat lands. Next slide, please. So the World Bank has been a proud partner of One Map project since about 2015, when the preparation or the first, in the aftermath of forest fire of 2015, when the discussion of that investment started. And that has been, to say the least, an amazing story. And also the fact that 2015, 43 or 46 million land rights were registered in the land registry, and currently over 117 million have been surveyed, and the registration or certification is approaching 100 million. No other country in the world has made similar progress in the recent decades. Nothing like this is happening. Indonesia is absolute world champion in this. And I think it's something to everybody to be very, very proud of. But of course there are challenges there, and that process, PTSL process, initially was not very much working on Ulayat lands or Adat lands. And therefore it is fantastic it's coming now. But a lot of those numbers do not yet cover the lands we're talking here. So it is time indeed to launch this program and make it a success. There's a lot of need. And of course the bigger challenge even is that forest areas are not subject to land registration currently. So yes, Kalahaka has parallel programs, and we hope all the success for those and the schemes of forest management. But it is also recognizable that there are lots of issues between land and forest areas. And as the next step, after these successful conceptual developments, the world would really want to see progress also in crossing the land and forest area divide. With that, the World Championship can become champion of the universe level performance, I think. Next slide, please. Indeed, there's been a lot of progress, and when we put it in the timeline, it's amazing how fast this has happened. So the indicative identification of indigenous peoples' land claims and the government's recognition of those and through the provincial governments and commitment not to issue extractive licenses to those areas, that is already a major recognition and tenure security improvement. When that then leads into legal rights to those land areas, even better, but even that indicative is something that is not as widely celebrated and known outside Indonesia as it should. I'm not aware of other countries making such quick progress, so Indonesia should be very proud of that. We are working on similar process in Laos Republic, and colleagues from Laos are here. Hope that will be successful with the same concept. And in Philippines, a lot of these things are already in place. It's a matter of where they can be implemented and so on. But we have been very, very happy in working together with ATRPP and in trying to find processes that would allow adapt land recognition and registration. And also there have been multiple attempts to create joint processes with Kalahaka, which hopefully will be possible in the future. Next slide. So here you see something that is not yet in the news, but hopefully is in the news in a couple of weeks. So this is a new investment operation by ATRPPN that World Bank supports, and it has strong focus on indigenous people's rights, but it also is comprehensive in terms of that it will also invest in land use planning, in climate sensitive land use planning in a sizable area of Indonesia. It will also invest in geospatial information, so that which allows risk simulation and adaptive planning and so on in a different level than before. So what we would like to see as the World Bank and our climate and land program, other countries doing similar investments, which focus on security of tenure, security of communal landholders, their tenure, and then to geospatial information, planning. And this particular one even also focuses on property valuation as one of the components. So again, if and when this becomes news in perhaps in less than a month time, again Indonesia is taking a front row and showing the world how to go by with land investments. Next slide, please. So what has already happened, relatively silent, is that the PTSL support that World Bank was providing, and by no means was that defining the government's PTSL, would have been just fine without that as well. But in those contexts where World Bank supported, then the ADAT rights were dealt with under the safeguards, World Bank safeguard schemes. And a lot of the sensitizations and consultations and inclusive approaches have been already tested in the OneMap under the safeguards, because the OneMap investments were not to be concerning any harm to Adat communities or Ulayat landholdings. So now ATR PPN has already several years of strong experience in sensitizing with communities, and that can be now translated into the Ulayat registration program. So hopefully that's been a good exercise for the ministry. For the World Bank, that's been a defining experience because of the scale of millions of land parcels and millions of hectares of coverage, and to actually find practical ways for vulnerability mapping, risk screening and monitoring, and inclusive consultation with indigenous peoples. So World Bank will travel with that information to other parts of the world, and as we know, only a few weeks from now we will receive, the ATR PPN will receive a big delegation from West Africa, where West African land ministries and land agencies will come to Indonesia and learn on how do you do tenure security programs at scale. So it's been a good mutual learning experience, which we are very grateful for. Next slide, please. Okay, so a few lessons from my point of view. These are simplifying. I'm always told that you as a land engineer and land surveyor, you have no gray areas and you don't understand political economy and everything is too simple. So with that caveat, it is very important to try to work on an approach which brings land and forest authorities together. We see a big difference in countries where forest management and forest tenure and land management are under separate ministries or agencies. So hopefully Indonesia can make progress with that in the future. And obviously in this very context where we are talking about today, indigenous peoples agencies, grassroots movements, CSOs, they are a very big part of success with this work. It's all about trust building and honoring that trust and delivering the results that are needed. What we also feel that strongly is that every country or city should have only one record on rights on land. There shouldn't be competing records. There shouldn't be competing mapping. And in Indonesia, we still have issues with lots of converted forest areas, which seem to be legally in limbo. On how do you solve that? Eventually, countries should have one record, one mapping of land rights, and there shouldn't be alternatives to that. And that's obviously, the world is full of countries which have that too. So it is not like it's rocket science. It's a matter of creating processes of settling the differences between two records or multiple records on land. And lots of countries have done that. Next slide, please. There's nothing wrong with historical or conventional way of doing systematic land registration. So I think ATR PPN is a world champion in that. And I've listed here the usual steps on doing that. I think all those same steps apply to Ulayat land registration with the heavy underlying overarching line, which is probably missing from there, which is community consultation. So as long as things are inclusive, consulted, participatory, and the results are brought back to the community for social verification, then my experience is that systematic registration is relatively easy to conclude. It's typical to result in the processes that have very low remaining dispute levels after the process has gone through. So that's kind of established science. So I know that ATR PPN is very good in that, so I expect very good results with the Ulayat registration. But there has to be that respect that the results are brought back to the community, and community creates socially together the agreement on the account. Legalistic approaches in here with a historical way of saying this is state land, so therefore will not work here. It's the new truth, new process, and new rights. Just maybe these are simplistic, but maybe not. So it's important to apart from being inclusive in terms of everybody in there, just basic things that use local languages, use local groups, use culturally sensitive approaches, consider women-specific challenges and programs. Those shouldn't be taken for granted. And I already mentioned that work with grassroots movements and successes there. The picture shows a GPS receiver. That's the least problematic part of it. The technology is there, mapping is cheap. Nowadays, if you count the cost of mapping as per land parcel, it's not many tens of cents of US dollar per land parcel. So technology is our friend nowadays, not an obstacle. Next slide, please.
Sorry, Dr. Terhonen, just a reminder, the time is approaching the end.
Sorry, I got carried away.
No worries.
Okay, so just to summarize, one registry, all rights, private, state, and communal, like Iskender was presenting as the vision. One mapping. And I think we have already spoken enough about the recognition of rights in the forests. That's a policy. Territorial, parcel by parcel approach is the best. That covers every land tenure type and leaves nothing out of it, the process. And then we already just spoke about the process itself. And next slide, please. And this was the sign that I'm finishing. So there's a publication coming. It's now in the final quality control. It discusses forest tenure and indigenous people's rights in South, actually it's East Asia Pacific countries. So watch this space, and thank you, and sorry for going over my time. Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you very much, Dr. Terhonen. Thank you.